You think you know your family? I thought I knew mine. I thought I had it all figured out. My son, the apple of my eye, had built what looked like a happy life. He had a wife who seemed charming, polite, and perfect in every way. She smiled at me during dinners, called me Mom, and always played the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law. From the outside looking in, anyone would have said we were a family touched by grace, maybe even enviable. But let me tell you something. Appearances lie. For years I brushed off little things. A sharp comment here, a cold glance there. I told myself, you're just being sensitive. She's young. She's adjusting. I convinced myself that any unease I felt was my imagination. After all, family is family, right? You don't want to believe someone could wear a mask so convincingly that you miss the monster hiding underneath. And then it happened. Just last month, I stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see. Something so dark, so toxic. It shattered every illusion I'd been clinging to. The truth about my daughter-in-law, her lies, her manipulation, her hidden motives, came tumbling out like a storm breaking through the calmest sky. In that moment, my heart didn't just ache. It dropped. My hands shook. My stomach turned. I remember sitting there, staring at the evidence, thinking, this can't be real. Not her. Not the woman my son trusted. Not the woman I welcomed into my home. But it was real. And suddenly, all those little red flags I'd ignored for years came back to haunt me like ghosts knocking on the door I refused to open. What I found will leave you speechless. Because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It is about deception so carefully woven that even the closest family can be blind to it. Get ready, because the truth is far more shocking than you could ever imagine. And once you hear it, you'll understand why I can never look at her the same way again. When I look back now, I can see just how carefully the picture was painted. A picture that, at the time, I believed with all my heart. Imagine this. Sunday dinners at my house, laughter ringing out, my son sitting beside his wife, holding her hand like they were two halves of the same soul. She would lean into him, whisper something in his ear, and he'd smile like he had just won the world's greatest prize. I'd sit at the head of the table, my heart swelling with pride, thinking, this is what happiness looks like. This is what family is supposed to feel like. In those early days, my daughter-in-law was, well, she was everything you'd want for your child. Polite, attentive, and eager to please. She brought over flowers when she visited, offered to wash dishes after dinner, and told me often how lucky she was to have my son. I remember thinking, maybe I've been blessed twice, once with a son, and again with the woman he chose. But slowly, so slowly that I barely noticed at first, things began to shift. It was nothing dramatic, just tiny, almost invisible changes. She started to take little jabs at family traditions, calling them old-fashioned, with a sweet laugh, as if it were all a joke. She began planning holidays in a way that edged me out of decisions. It wasn't hostile, not at first. It was subtle, almost clever. I told myself, she's just trying to make her mark. That's what young women do. Don't take it personally. Still, there were moments that made me pause, like the time she suggested they skip Thanksgiving with us and spend it with her friends instead, or the way she sometimes rolled her eyes when my son complimented my cooking, as if she didn't want to share his admiration with anyone else. Small things, insignificant, or so I thought. My son, bless his heart, was in love. He didn't see the tiny barbs in her words or the way she was quietly rearranging the dynamics of our family. He was happy, and his happiness blinded me too. I thought, she's young, she'll adjust. I just need to give her time. Love will smooth over the edges. But those edges only grew sharper. She slowly became the center of the family's orbit. Everything had to go through her. Plans, gatherings, even phone calls. She began answering my son's phone when I called, telling me he was busy when I knew in my heart he wasn't. That was the first flicker of unease that made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, her charm wasn't as innocent as it seemed. And yet, I dismissed it, over and over again. Because who wants to admit that the smiling, charming woman at your table might not be what she seems? Who wants to acknowledge the cracks forming in what looks like a perfect portrait? At the time, I told myself I was imagining things, that this was just the normal adjustment every family goes through when someone new joins. But deep down, something whispered to me, "Pay attention. These aren't quirks. These are warnings." Of course, I didn't listen. Not then. I was too busy clinging to the picture-perfect family image, too desperate to believe that everything was fine. And maybe, if I had listened earlier, I wouldn't have been so shocked when the storm finally hit. But that's the thing about storms, isn't it? They always start with a calm so convincing, you almost forget that chaos is only a cloud away. I wish I could tell you that I trusted my instincts the moment those little red flags appeared. But the truth is, I pushed them aside, telling myself I was being overly protective, maybe even a little paranoid. After all, every new relationship comes with adjustments, right? But as time went on, the whispers got louder. Not literal whispers, mind you, but those quiet moments, those subtle shifts in behavior that make you stop and think, something isn't right here. It started small. I remember one evening after dinner, I offered to help wash the dishes. My daughter-in-law smiled sweetly and said, "Oh no, Margaret, I'll take care of it." Harmless, right? But when I tried to stay and chat while she cleaned, she glanced at my son and said, "Why don't you go sit with your mom in the living room? I'll join you later." At first I thought, how thoughtful of her, giving us time together. But as weeks turned into months, those little moments started disappearing. Suddenly, my son wasn't staying to chat. Suddenly, she was always the one holding his attention, steering him away from me with little comments or tasks. And then came the whispers. Not whispers I heard directly, but whispers that made their way back to me. A cousin mentioned once in passing that my daughter-in-law had said she found my old-fashioned ways a little stifling. Another time, a family friend let slip that she had laughed about how I baby my son too much, that I didn't let him grow up. These weren't cruel accusations, but they stung. They planted seeds of doubt. The emotional manipulation was even harder to ignore. She had this way of making my son feel guilty if he didn't to prioritize her over everything else. If he planned to visit me on a Saturday, suddenly she'd fall ill or claim she needed help with something urgent. If he called me without her around, I'd notice later he sounded subdued, as if he'd been chastised. Slowly, he stopped calling as often, and when he did, she was almost always on the line too, chiming in, controlling the conversation. It became clearer at family gatherings. Once, during a Christmas dinner, my son went to sit beside me at the table, as he always had since he was a little boy. But before he could, she called out, "Honey, sit next to me. I saved you a spot." It was such a small thing, but I saw the hesitation in his eyes before he moved toward her. I laughed it off at the time, telling myself, of course he should sit with his wife. But the ache in my chest told me something else. Another moment that still lingers in my memory happened on Mother's Day. My son had always been thoughtful. Flowers, a card, sometimes even breakfast at my place. That year, he called me late in the evening, sounding rushed. He said, "Mom, happy Mother's Day. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. We were busy." In the background, I could hear laughter, clinking glasses, the unmistakable sound of a party. Later, a neighbor mentioned seeing them hosting a brunch at their house that very morning. My son didn't forget Mother's Day. He was made to celebrate it differently, without me. These things might sound petty on their own. A chair at the dinner table, a late phone call, a dishwashing offer. But when you line them up one after another, a pattern starts to emerge. And that's when I began to notice more. Her timing was impeccable. Too impeccable. Every time my son had plans with me, something got in the way. A flat tire, a sudden errand, a family emergency on her side. One or two of these could have been coincidence, but over time, it became too consistent to ignore. I started jotting down dates in a little notebook, just for myself. I wrote when he canceled plans, when she redirected conversations, when she made little digs about me or my ways. At first, I felt ridiculous, like some suspicious detective in my own family. But soon, the notebook became a map, and the map showed a pattern I couldn't deny. She was isolating him. And it wasn't just from me. She subtly did it with his friends too. I overheard her once say, "Oh, he doesn't really hang out with them anymore. They're a bad influence." But these were his lifelong friends, men he'd grown up with, people who'd been in his wedding. One by one, they drifted away, and my son's world shrank until she was at the very center. The more I noticed, the heavier my chest felt. There was one night in particular that burned itself into my memory. I had stopped by their house to drop off some homemade soup because my son had mentioned feeling under the weather. She opened the door, blocking the entrance with her body, her smile tight and forced. "Oh, Margaret, that's so kind of you, but he's resting right now. I'll take that into him." I hesitated, soup container in my hand, and for the briefest moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not gratitude, but irritation. I stepped back, handed her the soup, and left. Later, when I called my son to check on him, he said, "What soup?" That was the moment my suspicions hardened into certainty. She wasn't just trying to adjust to family life. She was deliberately isolating him from me, from his friends, from anyone who wasn't under her control. And the cruelest part? My son didn't even realize it was happening. I started writing more details in my notebook, the exact words she said, the tone she used when she dismissed family traditions, the dates of canceled plans, the excuses that never quite added up. It wasn't about building a case for anyone else. It was about keeping myself sane. I needed proof, even if it was only for me, that I wasn't imagining things. And yet, despite the growing evidence, I stayed quiet. Because what mother wants to look her son in the eye and say, "Your wife is cutting you off from the people who love you most"? What son would even believe it? He was so deeply in love, so entangled in her world, that any attempt to confront him would only drive him further away. So I watched. I documented. I bit my tongue when she made sly remarks. I forced a smile when she claimed traditions were outdated. I sat in silence when she rerouted plans or intercepted phone calls. Outwardly, I was the supportive mother-in-law. Inwardly, I was collecting every breadcrumb, every subtle move, every piece of evidence that told me this was no accident. The unveiling of discomfort wasn't a single moment of discovery. It was a slow unraveling, like a sweater pulled at the seam. Each tug revealed more of the truth, and the truth was this. My daughter-in-law wasn't just adjusting, she was orchestrating. Orchestrating control. Orchestrating isolation. Orchestrating a reality where my son had no one but her. And once I understood that, once I saw the pattern too clearly to ignore, I knew something had to change. Because if I didn't, I wasn't just going to lose my daughter-in-law. I was going to lose my son. And that, my friend, was a loss I could never bear. It happened on an ordinary Thursday. Funny, isn't it? How the biggest shocks of your life rarely come on the days you're expecting drama. I was at home, tidying up the dining room, when I noticed my phone buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it was one of those spam calls, but when I glanced at the screen, I saw my niece's name flashing. She sent me a screenshot, followed by a text. "Aunt Margaret, is this true?" The screenshot nearly made my knees buckle. It was a post from my daughter-in-law's private social media account, one she clearly didn't realize others could still see. In bold, boastful letters, she wrote, "Finally, everything is falling into place. Soon, the house, the cars, the money, all of it will be mine, just like it should have been from the start." There it was, in black and white. Proof that everything I had suspected wasn't paranoia or an overactive imagination. She wasn't just manipulative. She was entitled, smug, and planning to claim things that never belonged to her. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My son's face flashed before me, his warm smile, his reassuring words that he would always protect me. He trusted me. He wanted me to safeguard his legacy. And yet here I was, facing the ugly truth that the woman he had loved most in the world was plotting to erase me entirely. The immediate emotional impact was a storm. Anger, grief, betrayal, all of it collided inside me. I paced the living room, my hands trembling. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pick up the phone and demand answers right then and there. But another part of me whispered, "Wait, think. If you rush in blind, she'll twist it, just like she always does." So I took a breath, called my lawyer, and asked him to confirm, again, that everything legally was under my name, airtight. He chuckled softly, as though he'd expected this call someday. "Margaret," he said, "your son was deliberate. There's no loophole. It's yours, no matter what anyone says." That reassurance gave me the strength I needed, because I knew what had to come next. The confrontation. I decided not to do it over the phone. This wasn't the kind of conversation you have through text messages or half-shouted across cell towers. I invited her over, just the two of us. When she arrived, she walked in with that same confident stride, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome of arrogance. She didn't even sit before she started talking. "Margaret," she said, brushing an invisible speck of dust from her coat. "I've been meaning to talk to you. We should probably start discussing when I'll take over the house. I know it must be hard for you to manage on your own, and it only makes sense that I step in." I stared at her for a long moment, my fingers gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. My voice, when it came, was calm but laced with steel. "Interesting timing," I said, "because I happened to see your little announcement online. You know, the one where you claim the house, the cars, and the money were going to be yours?" Her face froze. For the briefest moment, I saw panic flicker in her eyes. But then, oh, she was clever. She plastered on a smile. "Oh, Margaret, you must have misunderstood. That wasn't serious. It was just a joke. You know how people exaggerate on social media." "A joke?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Is that what you call gloating about taking over everything my son left me? A joke?" She crossed her arms, her smile tightening. "Well, let's be honest. It should have been mine. Everyone expected it. I was his wife. Don't you think it's strange he left it all to you? People are already talking, you know. They're wondering why you're hiding things." And there it was, the gaslighting. The attempt to make me question myself, to paint me as the villain. I felt the room tilt with the weight of her words. For a split second, I almost faltered, almost let guilt take root. But then I remembered my son's voice, the lawyer's reassurance, the notebook filled with every sly move she'd made. "No," I said firmly, my eyes locking onto hers. "What's strange is how you think greed entitles you to rewrite reality. Your husband, my son, made his wishes clear. He trusted me, not you. And the more you open your mouth, the more I understand why." Her face turned red, her composure cracking. "You're lying," she hissed. "You've manipulated this whole thing to cut me out. I'll take you to court. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of snake you really are." I almost laughed at that, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Go ahead," I said. "Take me to court. But you'll lose, because this isn't my doing. It's his. He saw through you long before I did. And the sad part, If you'd shown even an ounce of genuine love or respect, things might have been different. But you made your choice. For a moment, she stood there trembling, caught between rage and humiliation. Then she grabbed her purse, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. That might sound like the end, but it wasn't. Because news spreads in families like wildfire. Within days, relatives were calling me, whispering questions. Some had already seen her post. Others heard her version of the story, where, of course, I was the greedy mother-in-law stealing from the grieving widow. Lines were drawn in the sand. Some family members sided with me, shaking their heads at her audacity. Others, blinded by her theatrics, believed her sob story about being cheated out of her inheritance. The fracture in the family was agonizing. Holidays became tense, phone calls awkward. Friends I'd known for years now tiptoed around me, not knowing which side of the tale was true. It broke my heart, not just because of the relationship strained, but because this wasn't what my son would have wanted. He would have wanted peace. He would have wanted love. Instead, greed poisoned the air, leaving scars on everyone. I had to make difficult choices. I distanced myself from those who refused to see the truth, who preferred her dramatics over my quiet reality. It hurt deeply, but I reminded myself, I wasn't the one who broke this family. She was. I was just trying to honor my son's wishes, to protect what he entrusted to me. And yet, even as the family fractured, I found a strange sort of clarity. For the first time in months, I wasn't doubting myself. I wasn't questioning my instincts. I had seen her true nature, and I refused to let her rewrite the story. The confrontation had been painful, yes. It had cost me relationships I valued. But it also set me free from the shadows of suspicion. The fallout wasn't just about losing her. It was about losing illusions. And as devastating as it felt in the moment, deep down, I knew it was better to live with the painful truth than to cling to a comfortable lie. When the door slammed that day, the echo stayed in my chest for weeks. You do not just walk away from a confrontation like that and carry on as though nothing happened. No, it lingers. It gnaws at you when you are making your morning coffee, when you are folding laundry, when you close your eyes at night and expect sleep to come. The truth had been dragged into the open, and with it came a wreckage I had not fully prepared myself for. At first, there was silence. My phone barely rang, except for a few brave relatives who whispered their support. Others disappeared. Not a peep, not a call. People I had cooked for, babysat for, celebrated birthdays with. Suddenly they could not look me in the eye. It was like they feared that by siding with me, they were picking a fight with her. The daughter-in-law, the widow, the grieving woman whose theatrics had painted me as some kind of villain. That silence hurt more than the shouting. When someone yells at you, at least they are acknowledging your existence. But when they ignore you, it is like being erased. I began second-guessing myself. Maybe I should have kept my mouth shut. Maybe I should have swallowed the hurt and just let her believe she would inherit everything. But then I would remind myself of the screenshot, her words written down for the world to see. That was not grief talking. That was greed. And if I had ignored it, I would have been complicit in my own erasure. The emotional toll was heavier than I expected. I had always thought of myself as a strong woman. After all, I raised a family, buried my husband, and then, worst of all, my son. If I could survive those heartbreaks, surely I could survive one greedy daughter-in-law. But grief stacks itself like bricks. You do not just carry one loss, you carry the weight of all of them. And in those first weeks after the confrontation, I found myself exhausted by the effort it took simply to hold my head high. Still, in the wreckage, I began to notice something important. The people who did stick around were worth their weight in gold. A cousin who showed up with soup and said nothing, just sat beside me. A neighbor who shoveled my driveway in silence. his small act of kindness saying more than any words could. These moments became my anchors. They reminded me that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but not with everyone. Only with those who prove, through action, that they deserve a place in your life. As the weeks turned into months, I started looking at the bigger picture. The lesson here was not just about inheritance or property. It was about toxicity, the kind that sneaks in quietly, wearing a mask of charm, until you wake up one day and realize your whole life has been rearranged without your consent. That was what my daughter-in-law had done. She did not storm in like a hurricane. She seeped in like smoke. A comment here, a manipulative glance there, slowly isolating my son, slowly chipping away at my confidence. The realization hit me hardest one night when I was going through old journals. I found an entry from 3 years before my son's passing. I had written about a family dinner, how she had made a snide remark about me being too old-fashioned, and how my son had brushed it off, telling me not to take it personally. I reread those words with fresh eyes and felt my stomach turn. It had started long before I acknowledged it. The toxicity was not new. I had just chosen to ignore the signs. And that, I think, is the most insidious thing about hidden toxicity. It convinces you to doubt your own instincts. For years, I had quiet little alarms going off inside me, but I silenced them with excuses. She is young. She will mature. I am overreacting. By the time I finally listened to my gut, the damage had already been done. My trust in her was gone. My family was fractured, and I was left wondering how much heartache could have been avoided if I had just trusted myself sooner. But here is where the healing began. Acknowledging that intuition is not paranoia. Intuition is wisdom. It is the body remembering patterns your mind refuses to see. I promised myself that moving forward, I would never again dismiss those little alarms. If someone makes me feel small, dismissed, or invisible, I will not write it off as just me being sensitive. I will listen. I will take it seriously. Moving forward also meant setting boundaries, and that was harder than it sounds. Boundaries with family are messy. People accuse you of being cold, of holding grudges, of creating drama. But I realized something. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about protecting the space you need to breathe. I did not slam the door on every relative who doubted me, but I did make it clear that I would not tolerate gossip, disrespect, or manipulation in my home. If someone wanted a relationship with me, it had to be built on mutual respect. Otherwise, the door stayed closed. Healing also meant reclaiming joy. For a long time, the house felt heavy, like every room carried an echo of arguments, whispers, and slammed doors. I had to change that. So I started small. New curtains in the kitchen, fresh flowers on the dining room table, repainting the guest room in a cheerful yellow. It sounds trivial, but it mattered. Each change reminded me that this was my home, entrusted to me by my son, not claimed by anyone else's entitlement. And with each step, I found pieces of myself again. I started attending community events, meeting friends for coffee, even joining a book club. For the first time in years, I was not walking on eggshells, worried about who might twist my words or use my kindness against me. I was just Margaret again, a woman with laugh lines, a stubborn streak, and a heart that had been bruised but not broken. Looking back now, I realized the truth was painful, but it was also freeing. Yes, I lost relationships. Yes, I discovered that some people I loved dearly were willing to believe lies about me, but I also discovered my own resilience. I discovered that my son, in his infinite wisdom, had seen through the fog long before I did. He trusted me with his legacy because he knew I could carry it, not just the material assets, but the responsibility of protecting what he valued most, integrity. So here is the lesson I carry. Grief will show you people's true colors, but it will also show you your own. It will test you, push you, and sometimes break you. But it will also rebuild you, sharper and clearer than before. My daughter-in-law's toxicity nearly consumed me, but in the end, it revealed something far stronger: the power of boundaries, the necessity of intuition, and the unshakable truth that survival is not selfish. Now, when I think about the future, I do not dwell on the wreckage. I focus on the path I am walking now, lighter, freer, and with my head held high. And I remind myself often, healing is not about forgetting the storm. It is about learning to dance again once the ground stops shaking. So if you ever find yourself in a similar position, remember this: you cannot control what people hide or what lies they spin. But you can control how you respond. You can choose to trust yourself, set boundaries, and protect your peace. That is not weakness. That is strength. And me? I may have walked through fire, but I came out knowing one thing for certain. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that save us. Here is the part where I want to step back from my own story and talk directly to you, because what I went through isn't just about one family, one daughter-in-law, or one inheritance. No, it's about the hidden dangers of concealed truths in any relationship. And if my experience can save someone else even a fraction of the pain, then it's worth sharing. The truth is, toxicity rarely announces itself with flashing lights or sirens. It doesn't come barging through your front door yelling, "Here I am, here to ruin your peace." No, it slips in quietly. It hides in sweet gestures, polite smiles, or carefully chosen words that sound kind but cut just a little too close. By the time you realize what's happening, you've often already given away pieces of yourself, your confidence, your boundaries, your trust. That's why concealed truths are so dangerous. They're not just secrets, they're weapons disguised as silence. I learned the hard way that ignoring small red flags only leads to bigger ones. The subtle digs, the moments of isolation, the way she twisted my son S's perception of me. All of that started with whispers I told myself weren't worth worrying about. And that's exactly how toxicity thrives, in our silence. So if you're watching this and nodding along because something feels familiar in your own life, let this be your sign. Pay attention to those quiet alarms in your gut. They are not paranoia, they are wisdom. So how do you recognize the signs? Start by asking yourself, do you feel smaller after interacting with this person, rather than bigger? Do you find yourself second-guessing your memory, your words, your intentions, because they've convinced you it's always your fault? Do they isolate you from others, creating a world where you feel dependent on their approval? These are not quirks. These are patterns. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsaw it. The most empowering thing you can do is trust yourself. Trust that little voice inside that says, something isn't right. And then, once you've recognized the signs, take action to protect your peace. That doesn't mean starting a war. It doesn't always mean cutting someone off completely. But it does mean drawing lines in the sand and saying, this is what I will allow, and this is what I won't. Boundaries are not selfish. They are shields. Shields that keep you whole when someone else is trying to chip away at your spirit. And let me tell you, protecting your peace is not just an option. It's a necessity. Because if you don't, no one else will do it for you. People will take as much as you're willing to give, even if it leaves you empty. But when you say no, when you walk away, when you guard your energy like it is the most precious resource you have, that S when you discover just how strong you really are. So my call to awareness is this. Look closely at the relationships in your life. Not just the obvious ones, but the quiet ones too. Who lifts you up? Who drains you? Who respects your boundaries? And who pushes past them every chance they get? The answers may surprise you, and once you see them, don't turn away. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living in the comfort of a lie. If my son's story taught me anything, It is that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to face the truth head-on, and the strength to walk away from what threatens our peace. You deserve that. We all do. So take this as your reminder today. Your peace is priceless. Protect it fiercely, because once it's gone, it takes a lifetime to get it back.